It was a quiet evening when Ethan moved into his new house on Maple Street. The street was serene, lined with oak trees, and each house had a charming, old-world feel. But there was something unsettling about his neighbor's house directly across from his. It was the only house on the block that appeared abandoned. The paint peeled off its walls, the windows were clouded, and an eerie silence surrounded it. Ethan had taken a job in the city, looking for a fresh start after a messy breakup. The house was perfect for his needs, affordable and close to work. But that neighbor's house made him uneasy. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but every time he looked at it, a chill ran down his spine. For the first few days, Ethan kept to himself, unpacking and getting settled. One night, as he sat in his living room, he thought he saw movement through one of the cracked windows of the abandoned house. His heart skipped a beat. He went to the window and stared, waiting for another sign. Nothing. He shook his head and returned to his book, telling himself it was probably his imagination. The following night, while watching TV, Ethan heard a knock at the door. Startled, he checked his watch. 10:30 p.m. No one had visited him since he moved in, and it was an odd hour for a friendly neighborly visit. He opened the door cautiously, only to find no one there. The street was empty, silent under the faint glow of the streetlights. But as he looked across to the neighbor's house, he thought he saw a shadow darting away from the window. "Maybe it's just a stray animal," he muttered, closing the door and trying to shake off the creeping sense of unease. That night as he slept, Ethan was jolted awake by the sound of footsteps outside his bedroom window. His heart raced as he listened closely. They were slow, deliberate footsteps, as if someone was pacing back and forth. He peeked through the blinds and saw a figure standing in front of the neighbor's house. The figure appeared to be staring directly at him. Ethan's blood ran cold. He blinked, and the figure was gone. He stayed up for the rest of the night, unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The next day, Ethan decided to ask around the neighborhood about the house. He spoke to Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly woman who had lived on Maple Street for over 40 years. "Excuse me, Mrs. Jenkins, do you know anything about the house across the street?" he asked. Mrs. Jenkins' face went pale. She looked around nervously before whispering, "That house? No one's lived there for years. The last people who lived there disappeared. The police never found them." Ethan's heart raced. "Disappeared? What do you mean?" "They were a young couple," she continued, her voice trembling. "One night they just vanished without a trace. But strange things happened before that. They used to complain about hearing noises, seeing things. Some say the house is cursed." Ethan thanked her, feeling more uneasy than ever. He decided that night he would stay awake and keep an eye on the house. As night fell, Ethan sat in his living room. The lights dimmed, staring out the window at the house. Hours passed and nothing happened. Just as he was about to give up and go to bed, he saw movement. A figure appeared in the window again. This time, Ethan didn't hesitate. He grabbed a flashlight and rushed across the street. The air was thick with tension as he approached the front door. The door creaked open as if it had been waiting for him. Ethan stepped inside, his flashlight casting long shadows on the walls. The house smelled of decay, and the air was heavy with dust. As he moved through the hallway, the floorboards creaked under his weight. Every step he took felt like he was walking deeper into a nightmare. He reached the living room, where old, tattered furniture lay covered in dust. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed through the house coming from upstairs. Ethan's pulse quickened. He knew he should leave, but something compelled him to go further. He climbed the stairs, his flashlight flickering. The noise grew louder as he reached the top. The door to the master bedroom was slightly ajar. Swallowing his fear, he pushed it open. The room was dark, except for a faint glow coming from the corner. Ethan pointed his flashlight at the source and gasped. In the corner of the room, he saw a figure, pale, gaunt, and staring at him with hollow eyes. It was a woman, her clothes torn and stained with dirt. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, a raspy, chilling whisper filled the room. "Help me!" Ethan stumbled back, heart pounding. He turned to run, but froze in his tracks as he heard footsteps behind him. He slowly turned around, his flashlight shaking in his hand. A man stood there, his eyes sunken, his face twisted in anger. His voice was low and guttural as he growled, "You shouldn't have come here. Panic surged through Ethan as he bolted for the stairs. The footsteps followed him, growing louder and faster. He reached the front door and flung it open, bursting into the night. He didn't stop running until he was safely inside his own house, locking the door behind him. His chest heaved as he caught his breath. He peered through the window, half expecting to see the figures chasing him. But the house across the street was still, as if nothing had happened. For the next few days, Ethan tried to convince himself it had all been a hallucination. Stress, lack of sleep, anything but the truth. But every night the footsteps returned, louder and closer than before. He could hear them pacing outside his window, sometimes even inside his house. One night, Ethan couldn't take it anymore. He packed his bags and left Maple Street for good. He never looked back. Months later, a new family moved into Ethan's house. They marveled at the quiet, peaceful neighborhood. But it wasn't long before they too began to hear the footsteps. And the house across the street remained silent, watching, waiting for its next visitor.